At the dawn of 1939, as storm clouds gathered over Europe, few outside the highest circles of British intelligence knew just how deeply MI6 had already begun threading its operatives into the heart of Adolf Hitler's Germany. Long before bombs fell on London or soldiers clashed at Dunkirk, a quieter war was already underway, one fought in dimly lit Berlin cafés, along embassy corridors and inside industrial offices where the hum of machines concealed whispered secrets. It was here, in these early months, that MI6's Berlin station began documenting Germany's rapid rearmament. Yet every revelation came with a chilling undertone. For each document smuggled out, another informant seemed to simply disappear. The challenge facing MI6 at this time was immense. Germany's security apparatus, particularly the Gestapo under Reinhard Heydrich, had perfected a culture of fear and suspicion. Foreigners were watched, Germans were encouraged to report even the slightest hint of disloyalty, and secret police patrolled the same spaces MI6 desperately needed to infiltrate. British operatives such as those within Section 5 worked tirelessly to establish reliable contacts. Factory engineers, railway clerks, minor bureaucrats, people whose access to details about aircraft production or troop deployments could change the trajectory of war preparations. But cultivating these sources required patience, trust, and calculated risk. At any moment, a conversation at a tram stop or a wrongly handled piece of microfilm could doom not just a mission, but an entire network. A diary entry from one MI6 case officer later captured the mood of early 1939. Berlin presents two faces, one confident, the other terrified. But everyone watches everyone. A man looks over his shoulder not because he sees danger, but because he expects it. It was this environment that shaped MI6's early operations, forcing them to rely on methods that blurred the line between diplomacy and espionage. Embassy staff quietly relayed details overheard at receptions. Journalists, posing as foreign correspondents, sketched railway yards and noted factory expansions. Even a handful of German businessmen, already uneasy with the Nazi regime, passed along production statistics that confirmed British fears. Germany was mobilizing faster than any intelligence estimate had predicted. The most alarming revelations emerged from the industrial centers, Krupp in Essen, Messerschmitt in Augsburg, and the chemical giant IG Farben. Reports indicated that Germany's aircraft output was reaching levels previously dismissed as impossible. One informant claimed that the Luftwaffe expected to double its fighter production within a year. Yet for all the intelligence gathered, something darker lingered beneath the surface. Several key German informants vanished in rapid succession in the summer of 1939. Their absences were never officially explained. In some cases, their families reported they had been taken for questioning. In others, there was no record of them at all, not even an arrest docket. MI6 assumed the Gestapo had uncovered them, but the pattern felt too coordinated, too efficient. Adding to the tension was a worrying operational anomaly. Throughout August, messages from Berlin to London began arriving with small inconsistencies, phrasing slightly off, code groups out of alignment, minor deviations that experienced cryptanalysts noted weren't typical of rushed fieldwork. Some in MI6 feared a breach, while others suspected the Germans were feeding forged information through a compromised channel. London issued strict cautions. Contacts were to be warned discreetly, meetings reduced, drops spaced out. But in espionage, such caution often comes too late. The process of verifying intelligence under such conditions required extraordinary judgment. MI6 analysts at Broadway buildings sifted through each intercepted report, searching for correlations. Did aircraft factories expand at the rate claimed? Did troop transports match the schedules given by informants? When evidence aligned, the insights were invaluable. When it didn't, the uncertainty itself became a warning. A memorandum from September 3, 1939, the very day Britain declared war, summed up MI6's unease. Acquisition of facts continues apace, but the disappearance of assets cannot be ignored. A systematic counterintelligence initiative appears underway. Looking back, these early missions hold important lessons. Intelligence work is not simply about gathering information, it is about understanding the hidden forces shaping what cannot be seen. It's about piecing together fragments to reveal not just what a nation is doing, but why it is doing it, and how far it is willing to go to conceal those actions. For MI6, the vanishing of informants signaled a new phase of the conflict. The Gestapo was tightening its grip, and Germany was closing its doors to foreign eyes. As 1939 turned into 1940, the losses in Berlin raised unsettling questions within MI6. Were these disappearances the result of routine security sweeps? Or had German counterintelligence identified something deeper, a British network still hidden, but slowly being unraveled? The answers remained elusive, setting the stage for the next phase of Britain's espionage war. Operations aimed not just at gathering information, but at preserving the fragile lifelines that kept intelligence flowing from inside Nazi Germany. In the bitter winter of 1940, as Europe reeled from the rapid advance of German forces, a little-known MI6 effort quietly intensified along the northern rail lines of the Reich. Few civilians traveling through Hamburg, Bremen, or Lübeck realized that among the conductors, ticket clerks, and freight inspectors stood covert British operatives working under the codename Operation Isinglass. Their mission was deceptively simple: track troop movements, supply flow, and armored train traffic in the months leading up to Germany's invasion of France. But simplicity ended the moment they crossed the border, for these routes were among the most heavily monitored corridors in the German interior. The struggle the Isinglass operatives faced was unlike anything seen in MI6's earlier Berlin missions. The Abwehr and Gestapo had dramatically increased oversight of Hamburg's Hauptbahnhof and its surrounding districts. Train workers were vetted. Baggage areas sealed. Locals were encouraged to report strangers who lingered too long with notebooks or cameras. And yet, MI6 needed eyes here more than anywhere else. Railways were the bloodstream of the Wehrmacht, moving divisions to staging grounds, relocating panzer units, and funneling ammunition to ports preparing for the next phase of Blitzkrieg. If Britain could chart these patterns, they could predict German offensives weeks before they began. To build the operation, MI6 relied on a blend of recruited locals and undercover British couriers posing as Scandinavian businessmen. One such operative, known only in post-war records as Ravel, established a particularly effective dead-drop system south of Hamburg. Under the cover of grain shipments, he hid microfilm train rosters inside ventilation slats of Danish cargo wagons. These tiny slips of film captured details of staggering value: regiment numbers chalked on boxcars, unusual nighttime transfers, and the presence, rarely admitted publicly, of armored trains carrying Panzer IV components. A surviving note from an MI6 field report reads, "The rail lines speak more honestly than the officials do." It was through these lines that a pattern emerged: increased artillery shipments toward Münster and Aachen, subtle repositioning of infantry divisions, and a spike in medical transport wagons, all signs that German high command was preparing for a major offensive in the west. Even the timing of trains mattered. German doctrine favored nighttime mass movement to conceal troop numbers, and Ravel documented a surge in such movements beginning in late March 1940. But with every insight came a new danger. One of the main couriers, a German-born watchmaker working for MI6, failed to appear at a scheduled handoff near Harburg station in early April. His absence was more than concerning; it threatened to unravel the entire operation. Couriers were trained to break contact if compromised, but this man had never missed a meet. His coded message the week before had hinted at increased surveillance on the platforms. MI6 wondered whether he had been detained, quietly interrogated, or worse, turned by the Gestapo. The reveal of his disappearance sent shockwaves through London. Commanders debated whether to halt Isinglass entirely. But the intelligence coming from Hamburg was too valuable, too timely. Reports indicated that armored divisions were no longer merely shifting, they were concentrating. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe fuel convoys intersected key rail points in a pattern consistent with preparation for a massive combined arms push. These findings would later match perfectly with what unfolded in mid-May, the German invasion of France through the Ardennes. From a modern perspective, Operation Isinglass underscores the vital importance of logistics in determining wartime strategy. Tanks, infantry, aircraft, none mattered without the rails that kept them moving. Intelligence officers today still study the operation's meticulous recording methods, noting how even small observations, a missing artillery car, or an overstaffed maintenance yard, helped build a picture of enemy intent. As April drew to a close, the uncertainty surrounding the missing courier cast a long shadow. Some MI6 officers believed he had been arrested. Others suspected he had fled after sensing a wider Gestapo crackdown. But a darker theory persisted quietly among senior intelligence staff. The man had been discovered weeks earlier, and his final transmissions were not his own. If true, Germany might have been feeding false information back to London, testing the British response while mapping MI6's extraction routes. The operation pressed on, though with tighter protocols and a growing sense of unease. For all the intelligence MI6 had gathered, they now faced a chilling dilemma: continue receiving reports from a network that might be compromised, or cut off contact entirely and lose access to Germany's critical rail corridors. It was a decision that would shape the next phase of British espionage inside the Reich, and its consequences would be felt long after the trains of Hamburg rolled into the fog of 1940. In the turbulent summer of 1941, as the world's attention shifted east toward Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, MI6 began one of its most audacious infiltration efforts of the entire war. Hidden behind the headlines and shifting front lines was a quieter offensive, an attempt to place a British intelligence asset directly inside the Reich Ministry of Armaments. Few outside the uppermost tier of MI6 and SOE leadership knew of the operation. Fewer still understood the significance of what it could reveal, the true scale of German aircraft production and the industrial capacity that kept the Luftwaffe in the skies over Europe. The struggle to insert an operative into the armaments ministry was immense. Germany's wartime bureaucracy, especially under the watchful eye of Minister Fritz Todt, was a fortress of paperwork, identification checks, and internal surveillance. Every engineer, every clerk, every messenger was screened for ideological loyalty and personal background. Yet MI6 had an opening. A German civil engineer, secretly anti-Nazi, who had been dismissed from his firm in 1938 for refusing to join the party. Operating under the code name Lyrik, he resurfaced in 1941 after being rehired due to the Reich's desperate need for technical expertise. MI6, through a circuit of intermediaries, learned that he had access to key production summaries, documents that could reshape British understanding of the Luftwaffe's strength. A surviving note from an MI6 planning file captures the urgency of the moment. RAF estimates vary wildly. Without confirmation from source within the ministry, our air strategy remains partly in shadow. It was the very heart of the intelligence dilemma. Guessing at German output was no longer enough. The RAF needed hard numbers: how many Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters were being built each month, how many Junkers bombers rolled off the line, how much aluminum Germany still possessed. Lyrik's access promised clarity where before there was only speculation. Once established inside the ministry, Lyrik began transmitting reports through a carefully coordinated codebook concealed within the binding of a trade directory. He noted production disparities between factories in Regensburg and Leipzig, documented engine shortages caused by overextension in the east, and even recorded internal disputes between ministry officials over resource allocation. These details, smuggled out via microdots attached to letters mailed to neutral Switzerland, were routed to MI6's Section 5 for analysis. For a brief moment, it seemed Britain had achieved the impossible, a direct conduit into the Reich's industrial heartbeat. But in the fall of 1941, the operation took a dark turn. German counterintelligence began sweeping through Berlin ministries after detecting an unusual transmission believed to have originated from within the capital. The Abwehr suspected foreign influence, though it lacked specifics. Internal security officers combed through memos, monitored typists, and reassigned entire clerical teams. A climate of fear settled over the ministry, one that made Lyrik's position increasingly precarious. The moment of revelation came subtly. London simply stopped hearing from him. Mistransmissions could be attributed to numerous causes: disrupted mail routes, increased surveillance, even the chaos of wartime bureaucracy. But MI6 analysts noticed deeper inconsistencies. Lyrik's final message included code groups that did not quite match his previous style, and the last production figure he submitted contradicted known Luftwaffe deployment records. It was enough to raise the suspicion that either Lyrik had been compromised or, worse, that German counterintelligence had seized his channel and was attempting to manipulate British estimates. Diaries recovered after the war revealed the tension inside MI6 during this period. One officer wrote, "We must assume the worst: capture, interrogation, and compromise. But still, his silence feels deliberate. If caught, he would not break easily." The ambiguity left MI6 in a difficult position. Cutting off the channel risked losing priceless intelligence. Continuing to rely on it risked being deceived. From a modern analytical perspective, the operation underscores a timeless truth of intelligence work. Access is sometimes less dangerous than silence. As long as Lyrik was active, his reports could be cross-checked, analyzed, or questioned. Once the transmission stopped, all MI6 could do was interpret the void and hope their assumptions held. In late 1941, as the first winter of the Eastern Front raged and Germany diverted more resources toward the fight with the Soviet Union, the loss of Lyrik left MI6 partially blind to industrial shifts that would soon shape the air war over Europe. His disappearance, never resolved, never confirmed, remains one of the quiet mysteries of wartime intelligence. Some historians believe he was arrested during the counterintelligence sweeps. Others argue he slipped away, sensing danger. A few suggest he attempted to continue his work independently before vanishing into the fractured streets of wartime Berlin. Whichever theory is true, MI6 knew one thing: the corridor into the Ministry of Armaments had closed, and with it, one of Britain's most valuable intelligence windows. As 1942 approached, London faced a new challenge: finding alternative ways to monitor Germany's industrial might, even as the lessons of lyric silence continued to haunt every new mission launched into the heart of the Reich. By 1942, the tides of war were shifting unpredictably across the globe, but in the icy waters of the North Atlantic, one truth remained constant: the German U-boat threat was strangling Britain's supply lines. Churchill famously warned that the Battle of the Atlantic was the only campaign that truly frightened him, and with good reason. By mid-year, Allied merchant losses had surged to catastrophic levels. Convoys vanished in fog and darkness, torpedoed by prowling submarines that surfaced only long enough to signal triumph. To confront this invisible predator, MI6 launched one of its most perilous missions inside Germany, Operation Periwinkle. Its goal was simple to phrase but nearly impossible to execute: document U-boat deployments directly from inside the submarine pens of Kiel and Wilhelmshaven. The struggle facing the operatives assigned to Periwinkle defied textbook espionage. Germany's U-boat bases were some of the most fortified structures in Europe, carved from reinforced concrete meters thick, designed to withstand the heaviest RAF bombs. Access required naval clearance, specialized badges, and, most crucially, the trust of officers within the Kriegsmarine. MI6 turned to a select hybrid team of agents: German shipyard laborers secretly opposed to the regime, Norwegian dockhands familiar with the Baltic routes, and two British-trained assets posing as Dutch maritime inspectors. Their covers allowed them to walk the narrow catwalks above flooded pens, where the metallic smell of diesel lingered beneath echoing footsteps. A fragment from an SOE debriefing details the environment inside the pens. The noise is constant: hammers, engines, welding. But the danger lies in the silence. When the noise stops, officers listen for whispers. Despite the oppressive atmosphere, the team succeeded in mapping pen layouts and identifying U-boat turnaround times. One detail caught MI6's attention: U-boat type WWII vessels were now cycling through repairs faster than previously estimated, suggesting Germany had increased its spare parts inventory. Another discovery was even more significant: evidence of new acoustic torpedoes being loaded onto select submarines, a development that could render Allied evasive tactics obsolete. The reveal that followed came from a series of sketches smuggled out of Kiel by an operative known only as Mariner. His drawings depicted unusually large storage chambers beneath Pen 3, hinting at the presence of experimental propulsion systems. In London, analysts compared the sketches with aerial reconnaissance photographs, noting alignment points that confirmed their authenticity. It was precisely the kind of breakthrough MI6 needed. With this intelligence, the Royal Navy and RAF Coastal Command adjusted their patrol routes, leading to a noticeable reduction in convoy losses during the summer. But espionage is never one-sided. As MI6 celebrated small victories, German counterintelligence intensified its sweep of the naval districts. The Abwehr, suspecting foreign infiltration after a compromised message in Copenhagen, began monitoring foreign workers and auditing naval inspection logs. One Periwinkle team in Wilhelmshaven noticed an unusual rotation of guards: silent, disciplined men who seldom spoke and always appeared in pairs. 4 seasoned operatives, such changes were harbingers of danger. Then the mission took a grim turn. A 2-man team assigned to observe late-night submarine departures disappeared after their final transmission on August 12. Their coded message hinted at a troubling suspicion: a mole within Allied intelligence, or at least someone feeding information to the Germans. The possibility of betrayal electrified MI6 leadership. How could Germany have anticipated their movements so precisely? Why were the pen guards suddenly stationed at every point the team needed to cross? No bodies were found, no names appeared in German arrest ledgers, and no post-war records offered clarity. It was as if the 2 men had been swallowed whole by the concrete labyrinth of the naval base. Historically, this raises a point often understated in intelligence work. Success can depend as much on internal security as on field craft. Intelligence historians today still debate whether a leak occurred in London, Lisbon, or Stockholm, 3 hubs known for their conflicting lines of communication. Some argue the disappearance was simply the result of heightened German vigilance. Others believe the men were interrogated and executed in complete secrecy, their fates intentionally unrecorded. Yet even amid these losses, the intelligence gathered from Operation Periwinkle paid significant dividends. U-boat deployment logs captured by the operatives matched nearly perfectly with intercepted Enigma traffic at Bletchley Park, giving the Allies an unprecedented ability to predict submarine operations. Convoys were rerouted, hunter-killer groups dispatched, and long-range aircraft positioned along new threat corridors. Slowly, methodically, the Allies regained control of the Atlantic. But as 1942 closed, the lingering mystery of the vanished team cast a long, uncomfortable shadow over MI6. Were their disappearances simply the cost of war? Or did they reveal cracks in the Allied intelligence structure, cracks that Germany had learned to exploit? London could not know the answer. What they did know, however, was that the next phase of the intelligence war would require more daring, more subtlety, and more vigilance than ever before. For as the U-boats prowled the Atlantic, the battle for information inside Germany was only growing darker. By 1944, as Germany braced for the growing pressure of war on two fronts, MI6 prepared to undertake one of its most dangerous and delicate intelligence operations deep inside the collapsing Reich. While Allied armies pushed steadily toward the borders of Western Europe, the British intelligence community had become fixated on a new and largely invisible target: the courier networks used by senior Wehrmacht officers to transport classified dispatches across southern Germany. These couriers, trusted messengers who moved by train, bicycle, or official vehicle, carried updates on the deteriorating Eastern Front, internal dissent within the officer corps, and the Reich's increasingly frantic defensive preparations. If MI6 could infiltrate this chain, they would gain insight into Germany's military fractures at a crucial moment in the war. The struggle to access this network was immense. Germany in 1944 was a nation under siege, both from external enemies and from its own sense of impending collapse. Security tightened in every ministry, every barracks, every train station. Couriers were screened relentlessly, their routes altered without notice. MI6 had to rely on a patchwork of intermediaries: resistance members in Munich, railway clerks in Ulm, and a handful of Wehrmacht officers secretly opposed to Hitler after the failed July 20 assassination attempt. This environment created opportunities, but also risks that exceeded anything MI6 had previously faced. One of the most pivotal figures in the operation was a Bavarian telegraph clerk given the codename Scribe. Working inside a communications hub near Augsburg, Scribe routinely handled encrypted Wehrmacht messages and was familiar with the movement patterns of field couriers delivering written reports. His connection to a disillusioned staff officer allowed MI6 to build a partial map of dispatch routes linking Stuttgart, Munich, and Berchtesgaden. A note from an MI6 brief from that year captures Scribe's importance. He gives shape to the shadows. Where others see random movement, he sees pattern. With Scribe's information, MI6 deployed one of their most skilled infiltrators, an Austrian-born British agent known as Helios, to masquerade as a low-level logistics inspector. Helios's task was to intercept fragments of dispatches without alerting the couriers themselves. He would board specific trains, posing as a passenger troubled by frequent delays, then maneuver close enough to overhear military conversations or observe document cases marked with color-coded tabs used by the Wehrmacht's operations staff. His reports gave MI6 glimpses into a crumbling Eastern Front: ammunition shortages along the Vistula, confusion among divisional commanders, and the quiet spread of defeatism. These details were invaluable to Allied planners preparing for future offensives. But the deeper Helios reached into the system, the more dangerous the operation became. Couriers were increasingly accompanied by Feldgendarmerie escorts. Document satchels were locked with ciphered clamps. And most ominously, Gestapo units began auditing railway staff records along Helios's routes. MI6 analysts in London noticed troubling irregularities in Helios's transmissions: references to delays that didn't match railway timetables, descriptions of couriers whose rank insignia seemed inconsistent. These discrepancies raised a disturbing question. Were the couriers adjusting their behavior because of internal chaos, or because someone had alerted them to MI6's interest? The reveal came in early October 1944, when a courier known only to MI6 as the Munich Messenger vanished en route to an expected checkpoint. He had been a minor but reliable figure, an officer rumored to pass along subtle hints about the mood among high command. His disappearance sent shockwaves through the entire operation. MI6 theorized several possibilities: interception by the Gestapo, an accident during chaotic wartime travel, or a deliberate severing of ties to avoid suspicion. But fragments of intelligence suggested something more troubling. Station staff in Landsberg reported seeing plainclothes men escorting a subdued officer off a Munich-bound train. A day later, Scribe warned MI6 that courier routes were being quietly restructured, as if the system itself was reacting to an unseen threat. The implications were severe. If the Germans had discovered even a part of the infiltration, the entire network might be compromised. Yet the intelligence gained up to that point was too valuable to simply abandon. Reports from Helios hinted at widening fractures within the Wehrmacht leadership. Some officers reportedly questioned Hitler's strategic decisions. Others secretly discussed surrender scenarios should Allied forces break into Bavaria. Such insights helped shape Allied diplomatic and military calculations as the war neared its final phase. From a modern perspective, this operation highlights a persistent challenge in intelligence work, assessing the credibility and continuity of human sources amidst evolving battlefield conditions. Analysts today still study the MI6 model used in 1944, discrete rail surveillance paired with selective interception, to understand how intelligence can be gathered from systems not designed to be observed. As autumn deepened into winter, MI6 increased its caution. Helios was instructed to limit his movements. Scribe's transmissions became shorter, more cryptic. And the disappearance of the Munich messenger cast an eerie silence over the operation. Had he been compromised? Had he attempted to defect? Or, most unnervingly, had he been acting as an unwitting double, passing information to MI6 that had already been shaped by German counterintelligence? London had no answers. All they could do was brace for the consequences of a mission that had walked the razor's edge between revelation and exposure. The intelligence war inside Germany was entering its most unstable phase, and as 1945 approached, MI6 operatives found themselves navigating a landscape where every ally, every message, and every courier could be either a lifeline or a trap waiting to spring. As 1945 dawned, Germany was collapsing under the weight of its own defeats. Yet for MI6, the final months of the war proved to be among the most dangerous. Allied armies were advancing from both east and west, cities were falling in rapid succession, and the once structured bureaucracy of the Reich was dissolving into chaos. But even as Germany crumbled, one priority remained urgent: locating, extracting, or accounting for the intelligence operatives Britain had embedded deep within the Reich throughout the war. Dozens of agents, rail observers, factory informants, code runners, and covert liaisons were still scattered across hostile territory. Some had gone silent. Others were trapped between converging armies. And a few, MI6 feared, had already paid the ultimate price for the secrets they carried. The struggle unfolded across a fragmented landscape. With front lines shifting daily, MI6 had to navigate not one danger, but a tangled web of them. The Gestapo, sensing its own demise, hunted suspected spies with renewed ferocity, executing prisoners without trial. Meanwhile, Wehrmacht units in retreat no longer kept orderly records, making it nearly impossible to trace captured operatives. To complicate matters further, the Soviet advance created a second threat. MI6 had no guarantee that British agents liberated by the Red Army would be safely returned. Some were interrogated, others detained as persons of interest. The operatives knew this. And so, many attempted to evade both German and Soviet forces in a desperate bid to reach Allied lines. One such figure was the Austrian-born agent known as Helios, who had spent 1944 infiltrating the courier network of southern Germany. His last confirmed transmission, sent in March 1945 from a farmhouse outside Augsburg, was brief, hurried, and unsettling: routes disrupted. Hostile presence near previous contact point. Proceeding west. MI6 analysts feared the worst. The Gestapo had been extremely active in the area following the rearrangement of courier chains earlier in the year. Yet no confirmation of Helios's capture ever surfaced. Weeks later, when American units swept through the region, they found no trace of him, no body, no arrest log, no execution file. His disappearance became one of several wartime enigmas that would linger long after the war ended. The struggle to extract other operatives proved equally daunting. A two-man MI6 team operating near the remnants of the Hamburg docks was discovered by advancing British forces in April 1945, exhausted, malnourished, and hiding in the basement of a bombed-out warehouse. They carried with them a bundle of hand-sketched U-boat deployment charts, the final pieces of intelligence gathered during Operation Periwinkle. Another operative, embedded in a munitions plant near Kassel, escaped only because retreating German guards abandoned their posts mid-shift. His diary later revealed a haunting detail. He had burned 6 months' worth of code notes in a furnace minutes before Allied troops entered the facility. Among the most revealing insights from this chaotic period came from debriefings of German civilians and military personnel who had briefly interacted with MI6 assets. One railway official admitted that he had secretly warned a British agent to flee after overhearing rumors of an impending security sweep. A factory foreman claimed he had concealed an MI6 contact inside a storage shed during the last days of bombings in March. Such testimonies suggested that, even in a totalitarian state, fragments of quiet resistance had helped MI6 operatives survive long enough for liberation forces to reach them. But not all stories ended with rescue. Some agents, such as Lyrik, the insider planted within the Reich Ministry of Armaments in 1941, were never seen again. Post-war investigations combed through German archives, prisoner lists, and execution records, but no definitive trace emerged. The absence of evidence blurred the line between death, disappearance, and voluntary flight. Did Lyrik perish during the security sweeps of late 1941? Was he executed in secret? Did he flee Berlin and attempt to hide among the civilian exodus? The questions remain unanswered, a reminder that intelligence work often leaves mysteries that history cannot fully decode. From a modern perspective, the final months of the war serve as a case study in the fragility of human intelligence during societal collapse. MI6 planners now examine these events to understand how networks disintegrate under pressure, how information flows break down, and how operatives must adapt when the systems they infiltrate crumble around them. The lessons are sobering. Even the most carefully constructed intelligence webs can unravel in the chaos of war's end. As Germany finally capitulated in May 1945, MI6 compiled its first comprehensive lists of missing, recovered, and confirmed lost operatives. Many were alive, rescued by American, British, or French forces. Some were hospitalized. A few were too traumatized to speak. Others were names on a ledger with no details beside them, only a date marking their last known message. And then there were the ones whose silence lingered, operatives who had carried secrets into the heart of the Reich and vanished before the war's final chapter. Their fates and the intelligence they gathered left behind a legacy that shaped Allied understanding of Germany's wartime machinery. For MI6, these unanswered questions would not mark the end of the story, but the beginning of a new and complex era of intelligence gathering, one shaped by the memories, mysteries, and sacrifices of those who never returned.